At my parents' 40th anniversary party in Millbrook, they proudly unveiled a handcrafted family tree with 112 carefully researched names going back 5 generations. Every cousin, every great aunt, every distant relative was there, beautifully calligraphed in emerald ink on ivory parchment. Everyone was applauding and taking photos. That's when I realized my name wasn't on it. Not crossed out, not forgotten, completely absent, like I'd never existed at all. When I discovered why they erased me, I understood I'd been living a lie my entire life. The Riverside Manor had been booked for months. My mother, Vivienne Caldwell, had insisted on nothing less than perfection for their ruby anniversary celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in burgundy silk, and the scent of white roses filled the ballroom. She'd spared no expense, hiring a string quartet, bringing in a chef from the city, even having custom napkins printed with Caldwell Family 4 decades of love in gold script. I smoothed my navy dress for the 100th time and checked my watch. 7:30. The presentation was scheduled for 8, right after dinner service. Everything had been planned down to the minute, because that's how Vivienne operated. Precision, control, image. My father, Harrison Caldwell, worked the room like the retired bank president he was, his silver hair perfectly styled, his handshake firm and practiced. Even at 72, he commanded attention when he entered a space. People naturally gravitated toward him, drawn by that particular mixture of authority and charm that had made him successful in business and beloved in our small Connecticut town of Millbrook. "Cassandra, darling, you look lovely," my Aunt Delphine whispered as she swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume. She was Vivienne's younger sister, the one who'd married into old Boston money and never let anyone forget it. "Your mother has outdone herself tonight. This family tree project, simply magnificent." I smiled and nodded, taking a sip of the champagne that was making my empty stomach flutter with nerves. For months, I'd been hearing about this family tree. Vivienne had thrown herself into the project with the same intensity she brought to organizing charity galas and historical society events. She'd spent countless hours at the Millbrook Historical Society, poring over genealogy records, calling distant relatives across the country, even hiring a professional genealogist from Hartford to trace some of the more obscure branches. 5 generations, Cassie, she'd told me over lunch at the country club just last week, her eyes bright with excitement. "Can you imagine? I found relatives we didn't even know existed. Third cousins in Oregon, a great-great-aunt who was apparently quite the scandalous figure in her day. It's going to be beautiful, a real testament to our family legacy." The word legacy always made me slightly uncomfortable coming from Vivienne's lips. She had a way of making it sound both precious and fragile, something that required constant tending and protection, something that could be damaged if you weren't careful enough with it. Dinner was served with military precision. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, wine pairings that Harrison had selected himself from his extensive collection. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the champagne. Updates on grandchildren, vacation plans, business ventures, all the comfortable topics that filled the space between people who shared DNA, but not necessarily intimacy. I found myself seated between my cousin Marcus, a corporate lawyer from New York, who spent most of dinner talking about his latest acquisition, and my uncle Theodore's new wife, Priscilla, who was closer to my age than his and seemed to be determined to prove she belonged by name-dropping every charity board she'd recently joined. "Your mother is remarkable," she gushed, leaning close enough that I could smell the wine on her breath. "The research she's done, the attention to detail. Theodore says she's discovered connections going back to the Revolutionary War. Imagine having that kind of history, that kind of rootedness." I murmured something appropriate and pushed my salmon around my plate. Rootedness. Another word that sounded different when applied to the Caldwell family. For some people, roots were anchors, grounding, stabilizing. For us, they felt more like chains, beautiful gilded chains that had been polished and displayed for generations, but chains nonetheless. My phone buzzed discreetly in my purse, a text from my best friend, Zoe. How's the family circus? Escape plan ready if needed? I almost laughed. Zoe had been my roommate at Wesleyan and remained my closest friend through all the years since. She understood the particular suffocation that came with being a Caldwell in Millbrook, where your family name opened doors, but also meant you could never really close them, where privacy was a luxury we'd never been allowed. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison's voice cut through the dinner conversation as he stood at the head table, wine glass raised. If I could have your attention for a moment. The room quieted instantly. Even at family gatherings, Harrison commanded that kind of respect. Vivienne rose beside him, her smile radiant, her posture perfect. She was still beautiful at 68, the kind of beauty that came from excellent genes, expensive skincare, and never having to worry about money.
40 years ago today, Harrison continued, I married the most remarkable woman I'd ever met. Vivienne brought grace, intelligence, and purpose to my life, and together we've built something I never could have imagined. A family that spans the country, a legacy that reaches back generations, and a future that promises to honor the best of who we are. Polite applause rippled through the room. I clapped along, studying the faces around me. Aunts and uncles, cousins and their spouses, family friends who'd been part of our circle for decades, all of them looking appropriately moved by Harrison's words, all of them part of this thing he was describing, this family, this legacy. Tonight, Vivienne took over, her voice clear and proud, we want to share with you something very special. Something that represents not just our 40 years together, but the incredible tapestry of connections that brought us to this moment. Two men in hotel uniforms wheeled in an easel draped with burgundy velvet. The fabric matched the table linens perfectly. Of course it did. Vivienne had probably coordinated every detail down to the thread count. For the past 8 months, she continued, I've been working on a project that I hope will become a treasured family heirloom. A comprehensive family tree documenting 5 generations of our lineage, researched and verified through historical records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and countless phone calls to relatives both near and far. The anticipation in the room was palpable. I found myself leaning forward, despite my general wariness of family drama. There was something genuinely exciting about the idea of seeing our entire family mapped out like that, seeing where we all fit in the larger story. Without further delay, Harrison announced, grasping one corner of the velvet drape, we present the Caldwell Family Tree. 112 souls across 5 generations, all connected by blood, by choice, and by love. They pulled away the velvet with a flourish that would have made a magician proud. The family tree was absolutely breathtaking. Mounted on rich walnut wood that had been polished to a mirror shine, the design was elegant and sophisticated. The tree itself was rendered in deep browns and golds, its branches spreading gracefully across the surface like something from an illuminated medieval manuscript. Each name was written in flowing calligraphy, using emerald ink that caught the light beautifully. Small photographs accompanied many of the names: wedding portraits, baby pictures, formal family photos spanning decades. All of them looking appropriately moved by Harrison's words, all of them part of this thing he was describing, this family, this legacy. Oh my heavens! There's great-grandmother Cordelia! Exclaimed my cousin Beatrice, pointing to a sepia photograph near the top of the tree. I haven't seen that picture in 20 years! Look, Marcus, she found your wedding photo, called his mother, Aunt Penelope, beaming with pride as she spotted her son's section. I hung back for a moment, watching the excited crowds gather around the display. The tree really was magnificent, a work of art that somehow managed to capture not just names and dates, but the essence of family connection itself. Vivienne had outdone herself, and I felt a genuine surge of pride in what she'd accomplished. Slowly, I began to make my way toward the display, champagne glass still in hand, smiling as relatives pointed out their discoveries to each other. The tree was organized chronologically, with the oldest generation at the top and the youngest at the bottom. I started at the top, tracing downward through great-great-grandparents I'd only heard mentioned in passing, through the familiar names of grandparents I remembered from childhood visits. There was grandfather Edmund, looking distinguished in his World War II naval uniform, grandmother Celeste in her wedding dress, all pearls and lace and old Hollywood glamour. Their children, Harrison, Theodore, Penelope, and Delphine, were all represented with their respective spouses and offspring. I followed the branches down to my generation, scanning the names with growing anticipation. There was Marcus with his wife Jennifer and their 2 daughters, Beatrice with her husband David and their son, cousin Timothy, who'd moved to California and worked in tech, cousin Grace, who'd surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian and settling in rural Vermont. My eyes moved methodically across the bottom branches, searching for the section that would contain my immediate family. There, Harrison and Vivienne's branch, prominently displayed in the center of the composition. And that's when the world tilted sideways. The branch showed Harrison and Vivienne, married 1984. Below their names, connected by delicate golden lines, were their children. 2 children. My older brother Jonathan, 35, married to Rebecca, father of twin boys age 8, and my younger sister, Serafina, 28, unmarried, working as a pediatric nurse in Boston. That was it. No 3rd child, no daughter born in 1991, no Cassandra Ann Caldwell, 33 years old, working as a freelance graphic designer, living in a converted loft in Hartford, owner of a rescue cat named Fitzgerald. I wasn't there. Not misplaced on a different branch, not accidentally omitted from one section and included in another, not related to smaller print or a different color ink. Completely absent, like I had never been born.
The champagne glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the sound sharp and jarring in the warm, celebratory atmosphere. Conversations paused. Heads turned in my direction. "Oh, sweetheart, are you all right?" Aunt Delphine rushed over with a napkin, concerned about the mess. "I'm fine," I managed, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Just clumsy, sorry." But I wasn't fine. I was staring at a family tree that contained 5 generations of Caldwells, 112 carefully researched and lovingly documented names, and I wasn't among them. The branches continued to blur and shift in my vision as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe I was looking at the wrong section. Maybe my name was somewhere else, connected to a different branch for some reason I couldn't understand. I moved closer to the display, ignoring the concerned murmurs from relatives who'd noticed my dropped glass and pale complexion. My hands were shaking as I traced every branch, every connection, every carefully drawn line. Great-great-grandparents at the top? Check. Great-grandparents in the 2nd tier? Check. Grandparents in the 3rd level? Check. My parents' generation in the 4th tier? Check. My generation, all the cousins, all the spouses, all the children? Check. Except me. Jonathan was there with his perfect wife and his perfect twin boys, looking like the ideal American family in their Christmas card photo. Serafina was there with her nursing school graduation picture, looking proud and accomplished and exactly like the daughter any parent would want to claim. And then nothing. No 3rd child, no middle daughter, no explanation or gap or indication that someone was missing. It was as if 33 years of my life had been erased with careful, deliberate precision. "Cassie?" I turned to find Jonathan approaching, his brow furrowed with concern. He looked exactly like Harrison, the same strong jaw, the same authoritative bearing, the same way of moving through space like he belonged wherever he happened to be. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice gentle but curious. "Everything okay?" I opened my mouth to respond, to ask the question that was burning in my throat like acid. Why am I not on the family tree? Where is my name? What happened to me? But the words wouldn't come. Because looking at Jonathan's kind, confused face, I realized he wasn't seeing what I was seeing. He wasn't noticing any omission. To him, apparently, the tree looked complete. To him, apparently, I had never existed either. "I need some air," I whispered, pushing past him toward the exit. "Cassie, wait." But I was already moving, weaving through clusters of relatives, still admiring Vivienne's masterpiece, still pointing out connections and sharing memories, and celebrating this beautiful documentation of our family's history. A history that, according to the evidence mounted on walnut wood and written in emerald ink, had never included me at all. I made it to the ladies' room before the tears started, locking myself in a stall and trying to breathe through the crushing weight of what I'd just discovered. My whole life, 33 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays and graduation ceremonies, family dinners and holiday traditions, had been systematically erased. Not forgotten. Erased. There was a difference. Forgetting implied carelessness, oversight, the kind of human error that happens when you're dealing with 112 names across 5 generations. But this wasn't carelessness. This was precision. This was months of careful research, professional genealogy services, verification through historical records. This was intentional. As I sat in that marble-appointed bathroom stall, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration continuing in the ballroom, one terrible thought crystallized in my mind. If I wasn't on the family tree, maybe I wasn't supposed to be in the family at all. But let me back up. Let me tell you what normal looked like in the Caldwell family, because without that context, you can't understand how devastating this moment really was. Growing up in Millbrook was like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting. If Norman Rockwell had painted exclusively wealthy New England families with complicated dynamics and unspoken rules about everything from table manners to acceptable career choices. Our house was a sprawling colonial on Elm Street, the kind with a circular driveway, perfectly manicured gardens, and enough bedrooms that I never quite understood why my parents always seemed to know exactly where I was at any given moment. Sunday dinners were mandatory. Not suggested, not encouraged, mandatory. Every week, without fail, the entire family would gather around the mahogany dining table that had belonged to Harrison's grandmother. Vivienne would use the good china, the crystal glasses, the silver that required polishing by our housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. Every Thursday, we'd discuss current events, school performance, upcoming social obligations, and community news with the same careful attention most families reserved for holiday meals. Jonathan had always been the golden child, 3 years older than me, captain of the lacrosse team, student body president, early admission to Yale, followed by Harvard Business School. He'd married Rebecca Whittemore, daughter of the Whittemore family that owned half of the commercial real estate in Hartford, in a wedding that made the society pages of 3 different newspapers. Their twin boys, Harrison Jr. and Edmund, were 8 years old and already enrolled in the same prep school that had educated 3 generations of Caldwell men.
Serafina was the artistic one, the free spirit who somehow managed to be rebellious in ways that still made our parents proud. She'd majored in nursing at Boston College, moved to the city, worked at Children's Hospital, and dated a rotating series of acceptable young men who were interesting enough to seem bohemian, but stable enough to bring home for holidays. Her apartment in Back Bay was tiny but charming, filled with plants and vintage furniture and the kind of carefully curated imperfection that only people with trust funds can afford. And then there was me. I'd always been the middle child, in every sense of the phrase. Not quite as accomplished as Jonathan, not quite as charming as Serafina, not quite fitting into any of the neat categories that the Caldwell family specialized in creating. I'd gone to a good school, Connecticut College, not Ivy League, but respectable, studied graphic design, creative but practical, and built a modest but successful freelance business. Entrepreneurial enough to seem ambitious, small enough to not threaten anyone. My apartment in Hartford was a converted loft in the Arts District. Exposed brick, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that let in beautiful light for my design work. I lived alone, except for Fitzgerald, a orange tabby I'd rescued from the shelter 2 years ago. My social life revolved around a small group of college friends, fellow freelancers, and the kind of people who went to gallery openings and poetry readings and farmers markets on Saturday mornings. It was a good life. Maybe not the life my parents had envisioned for their middle daughter, but it was mine. I paid my own bills, chose my own clients, decorated my space exactly how I wanted it. I'd even started dating someone, David Chen, a software engineer I had met at a coffee shop in West Hartford. He was kind, funny, completely unimpressed by family names or social connections, and had never once asked me what my father did for a living. The family dynamics had always been complex, but predictable. Harrison was the patriarch, the final authority on major decisions, the one whose approval mattered most in any family discussion. Vivienne was the social director, the keeper of traditions, the one who remembered birthdays and coordinated holiday celebrations and maintained relationships with an extensive network of relatives, friends, and social acquaintances. Jonathan was being groomed to take over Harrison's role eventually. He already served on the boards of 2 local charities and was being courted by several investment firms that wanted the Caldwell name on their letterhead. Serafina was allowed to be different because her difference was palatable, admirable even. She helped sick children and lived in the city and brought interesting stories to family dinners. I had always been the one who asked uncomfortable questions. Why did we need to belong to 3 different country clubs? Why couldn't I go to public school like my friends from dance class? Why did every family gathering have to feel like a performance? Why did Vivienne care so much about what other people thought? Because reputation matters, Cassandra, was always her answer. Because we have a responsibility to uphold certain standards. Because when you come from a family like ours, your choices reflect on everyone. I'd learned to navigate these expectations carefully. I attended the required events, charity galas, family gatherings, holiday parties at the country club. I dressed appropriately, spoke politely, and never brought up topics that might create tension. But I also maintained my own life, my own space, my own sense of who I was outside of being a Caldwell. It was a delicate balance, but it had worked for 33 years. My relationship with each family member existed in its own carefully maintained bubble. Harrison and I talked about business and current events, safe topics where my opinions were welcome but not particularly consequential. Vivienne and I discussed my work, my apartment, my cat, the surface details of my life that she could understand and occasionally approve of. Jonathan and I maintained the easy affection of siblings who genuinely liked each other but didn't have much in common. Serafina and I were closer, sharing the particular bond that comes from being the non-golden children, though she'd never admit to seeing herself that way. Family events followed predictable patterns. Birthdays involved dinner at the country club or catered affairs at the house. Holidays meant specific traditions that had been established decades ago and never deviated from. Christmas morning gift exchange at the house, followed by dinner at Aunt Delphine's. Easter brunch at the club, 4th of July barbecue in our backyard with the same guest list every year. I participated in all of it willingly, if not enthusiastically. These people were my family. This life was the foundation everything else was built on. Even when the expectations felt constraining, even when the conversations felt superficial, even when I sometimes wondered what it would be like to skip a Sunday dinner or bring David to a family event, I never doubted my place in the constellation. I was Cassandra Caldwell, middle daughter, graphic designer, the one who asked too many questions but ultimately fell in line, the one who lived independently but came home for every holiday, the one who carved out her own space while still maintaining her connection to the family name and everything it represented. Or so I thought.
Standing in that bathroom stall at Riverside Manor, staring at my phone screen where I'd pulled up every family photo from the past year, I started to see things differently. In the Christmas morning photo, I was there, but positioned slightly outside the main group. In the Easter brunch picture, I was seated at the far end of the table. In Jonathan's birthday celebration shots, I appeared in exactly 2 photos out of dozens taken that evening. I'd always attributed this to coincidence, to my tendency to step away from cameras, to being the one who often volunteered to take pictures rather than be in them. But now, with the image of that family tree burned into my mind, I started to wonder if my absence had been more systematic than I'd realized. If someone had been erasing me, slowly, carefully, methodically. One photo, one mention, one memory at a time.